All right, gentlemen, first, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We're just going to dive right in. We talked about the city leaders have plans to address the affordable housing crisis in Charlotte, and they've even talked about it. But obviously, there are obstacles that we have to overcome. What are those obstacles that you see from your points of view?
You know, the problem with affordable housing in Charlotte is really partly market-driven. The price of land, the price of houses has gone up so fast in recent years that it's not kept up with demand. Saw a statistic the other day that said that the growth in population in Charlotte has been 2% in recent years, but the growth in housing is only about 1.3% per year. So that's a recipe for an affordable housing gap, which is where we are right now. So the issue is, how do we make sure that we can make land available for affordable housing and somehow incentivize or cause developers to build affordable housing? And the answer to that is a complicated equation of money coming from multiple sources.
I think another problem we have is we still have people, residents, who don't want affordable housing in their communities. I literally was sitting in a zoning related meeting less than an hour ago. This was in a historically black neighborhood where houses have traditionally been affordable. But you had people there saying, we've got enough affordable housing, we don't want any more.
There's a stigma, right?
Absolutely. And they were appealing to that developer not to include affordable housing in this proposed development.
We've heard the mayor, Vi Lyles, talk about economic mobility and people basically adapting to the housing inventory that currently exists, but nothing is mentioned about building new homes, what that might look like. How do we change that conversation from let's take advantage of what we have, which we know is not enough, to let's build more?
Well, remember last year the City Council, after much debate, decided to increase the size of the affordable housing bonds that we do every 2 years here in Charlotte. Previously, they'd done $15 million. Last year, voters approved a $50 million bond. So the first step here is to increase the pot of money that's available to do this. And as I mentioned a minute ago, you know, we have a complicated equation to get an affordable housing project built. We need money for land. In cases where we can get it, we need free land. We need tax credits is another way that they do that. All of these things go into creating a situation where a developer can build housing and offer it at prices that are affordable for people who make less than the area median income. And that's usually the way we measure it. You know, the different levels are 80% or less, 60% or less, or 30% or less are the kind of the benchmarks they look at for what kind of, what level of housing we need. And, you know, at the upper end, the economics are not so difficult. We have more and more housing these days for people who make less than 80%. But at that very low level, the less than 30% of the median income here, which is, it's like $14,000 for a household, you know, being able to afford rent or to buy a house in that situation is just not possible in most areas. And as we mentioned a minute ago, we just don't have as much of an inventory of that housing.
Yeah.
I think we have to focus on new housing as well. But I've talked with a number of developers who say we can't build our way out of this. So no amount of new construction, reasonable new construction, is going to really get us there. So one of the things we have to do is preserve some of the affordable housing that is already there. We can't keep churning, we can't keep tearing down affordable housing and expecting new construction to not only take that place, but to also take care of the growth that David talked about earlier, the population growth that we're seeing in the city.
What we're talking about there, they have a term for it. It's called naturally occurring affordable housing. And one of the big pushes by the City Council right now is to try and see what we can do to preserve those. And that takes a number of forms. One thing the city is doing is they're making money available now to repair homes that are in disrepair. That would be for single-family owner-occupied homes. And the push there is to try and keep these homes on the market in an affordable sense so that they're not snapped up by investors and converted into luxury homes. There are other programs that they do to try and help out in these situations, like making some rental subsidies available and helping out homeowners in other ways. As far as rent goes, you know, an apartment complex that's on a few acres in a desirable neighborhood is going to get snapped up by investors and converted into something that's not affordable for the people who live there right now. And what we are looking at is how do we make sure that those stay the way they are? And so they're trying to come up with money and incentives to help developers fix those up and keep them at the market point where they are. It's really difficult to do that. I mean, we have many examples every year now of apartment complexes that are being sold and renovated, and suddenly those $500 or $600 a month rents are $1,200, $1,500.
Some of the people who are being affected most are seniors. Seniors who have been in their homes for a long time in communities that are in transition. And there are actually programs designed to help those seniors stay in their homes and to keep those properties affordable. So there are any number of programs that are out there. There are nonprofit organizations that are looking to buy up land in a land trust type environment to keep property affordable. But if we're going to address the affordable housing issue, it can't just be all new construction. We've got to find a way to keep existing housing affordable as well.
Mm-hmm. So people may have heard about some of the initiatives that are going on. I mentioned a minute ago the $50 million housing bond that was passed, and that is money that sits in a pot of in a fund for to be given out to projects that are going to be committed to having affordable housing. And we've got the $50 million commitment from the taxpayers. We've got an equivalent $50 million commitment from the business community here, and they actually announced recently that they've surpassed their goal. I think they got $53 million now, and that's come from banks and corporations here and other places. There are commitments from the faith community here to also chip in on this. There's an outside organization called LISC, the Local Investment Service Corporation, which is helping out here with the city's efforts to try and get more affordable housing built. And they have agreed to chip in $25 million. Altogether, there's a couple $100 million now available that wasn't available a couple of years ago to do this. The trick now is putting all the pieces together into projects that will get built. And you asked before, how do we actually get from this push and this idea to the actual construction? And each one of these projects is a math equation that involves the cost of the land, the cost of construction, figuring out how many units to make available at each price point, and the developers have to do the math and figure out if they can make it work. And we've seen a few examples of this, but we need more of them.
The LISC model is actually very interesting. Not only are they focused on affordable housing, but they're also focused on affordable economic development in certain neighborhoods. The theory being, if they can focus on economic mobility, then they keep people at a certain income level and keep them from being pushed out of certain neighborhoods. So it's not just, once again, it's not just building more affordable housing, but it's also economic development as well.
Yeah. David, I want to go back to a point you mentioned, the faith community and how churches have given land and money to fix this crisis. Talk a little bit about how that looks here in Charlotte at this point.
So, even before this push last year started happening with the city council, many houses of worship around Charlotte started to look at this themselves. They would get together and they would ask themselves, what is our mission? And oftentimes the answer comes down to, how can we help with this major problem in our communities? And so we've had some examples over the past few years of faith communities getting together and making commitments of money. One example is Covenant Presbyterian putting $2 million towards an affordable housing apartment complex on Freedom Drive. Myers Park Baptist Church, Myers Park Presbyterian, Myers Park United Methodist Church have all got committees that are working on this, and they are looking for ways to help out. St. Paul Baptist is developing housing in its backyard. The Park Church gave some of its land on Beatty's Ford Road. So we have lots of examples of churches here that are getting involved in every way possible to make more housing available.
Yeah, and that's substantial too, given how many houses of worship we have here in the Charlotte area. So that's a pretty huge contribution. Glenn, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I was going to say many of the African American churches are in these neighborhoods that are in transition. So this is an area, this is a problem that affects them not just from a spiritual standpoint, but from a very real standpoint. Many of their members are being pushed out of these long-term neighborhoods.
Mm. We mentioned, Glenn, we mentioned transportation and how that can be an obstacle, a challenge for people who are pushed out, because then it's almost like a domino effect. if you can't have affordable housing near where you work and you have to live farther away, then there are issues with transportation too. That's something a lot of people don't even consider.
Yes, the mayor has made clear that transportation is one of the areas she wants to work on because it's so intricately tied to affordable housing. As you point out, as people are pushed farther and farther out from the city, how do they get into their jobs? How do they get in for entertainment, for that matter, recreation, all of the things that are happening closer in? And our transportation system currently is not designed to get people into the city efficiently. So something is going to have to be done in the way of redesigning our transportation system to make it more efficient and easier to get people into the city where the jobs are.
There have been some improvements in recent years. I did a story when the Blue Line extension from Uptown to the University area opened up last year, and I talked to a woman who lives in the south part of Charlotte, and she used to walk a mile to the light rail station, take a light rail to Uptown, take a bus from Uptown to another bus, and then wind up at her employer in Northeast Charlotte. And now that the Blue Line is out there, she can take one ride on the light rail, and her employer provides a shuttle, and so her commute went from 2 hours to like 45 minutes.
Wow.
And so there are some examples like that. CATS also has been redesigning the system. They have an initiative called Envision My Ride, where they have been trying to rationalize some of these bus routes and cut down that commute time. I mean, a lot of people have commutes that are in the 90-minute range, and if we could get those down even under to an hour, you know, that would make a huge difference. One of the big issues is everybody has to come downtown and then go back out to their employers unless they work downtown. And so we need some more crosstown buses, and we've added a few of those, but it's a complicated undertaking, and this is all happening at a time when funding is not rising very fast, and ridership, frankly, is not growing on the CATS system right now. And some of that may be the result of people moving out to further out and getting jobs elsewhere, but it's something we need to keep working on.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to mention or say?
Glenn, you mentioned the idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard, people opposing affordable housing projects. I've been working on a story recently about YIMBY, which is yes in my backyard. It's a movement that is starting to catch on around the country. It started out in places like Seattle and San Francisco, Boston, Washington. We are starting to see some groups emerge in Charlotte that are kind of pushing this idea of YIMBY. They're advocates for more development, for denser development, and for more affordable housing. And they're doing it by looking at the numbers, by getting groups of people to go and actually support projects that are up for a vote at the city council. So you mentioned groups that come and they oppose it. We may in the near future be seeing more people coming to speak out in favor of some of these projects. And I think that's an encouraging development here in Charlotte that's going to push things forward.
I think that's a very promising sign, but for that to work, you're going to have people who are in those neighborhoods affected, who are also speaking up, not just activists from across town, but actually people who will say, yes, I'm willing to have affordable housing in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And some of the YIMBY groups around the country that I've been looking at are examples of folks who got started because there was a NIMBY movement in their neighborhood and they didn't agree with it. And so they said, we're going to go to the city council and speak out in favor of this. And so, like I said, we need to see more of that here. And there have been some examples of residents coming out and speaking in favor of things here, but a lot more needs to happen to help smooth some of these projects through.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you.